We're on. We're on, and welcome to the very first webinar from Your People Associates Ltd. My name's Iain Smith. I'm one of the directors of the business. I'm delighted to welcome you all. We're here today to talk a little bit about Covid-19 and the approach that small businesses and business leaders would want to take at this troubling time for us all, actually. I'm thinking back only 6 weeks ago now, I was sitting in an office in Piccadilly for my previous company. I think at the time, our biggest concern was Brexit and any talk of coronavirus, as I think it was commonly referred to then. It was something that was going on in China, and it was the third item on the Channel 4 news. And, you know, we wind forward 6 weeks now, and it's now front and centre and affecting us all in a way that we couldn't have foreseen and, you know, couldn't have imagined, I think, before it came and hit us in the face like this. So our business was incorporated on the back of the crisis itself. Nicola and I met probably a few months ago in a coffee shop. We were talking about perhaps looking at starting a values-driven HR consultancy business that we could support like-minded small and medium-sized clients. And now here we are. So we are a providers of HR consultancy, recruitment services and online learning. And we like to think that we lead from the heart. We believe that no business functions without people right at its core. And that's the unique selling point, if you like, of our business. But we're here to speak to you today about COVID-19. We're probably going to take about 45 minutes today to talk you through the presentation. We've got a little bit of an agenda here. We're looking at the background and the impact of COVID-19 that we've seen today. We're going to talk a little bit about the anticipated economic impact, which is already starting to become clear. We've got some general guidance for business leaders like yourselves, and we're going to go into some common questions and answers, things that we've been asked by some of our own clients, and which we thought were kind of good common questions that we might be able to relay back to you and start to at least turn the thinking towards some of these sorts of issues that I think are going to be common issues. And we're going to recommend some best practice and some resources that we found in the process of doing the research for this webinar that we think you might find useful as well. So instead, in terms of the background, we now are aware that the coronavirus pandemic is causing large-scale loss of life and a major economic crisis, not only in the UK, but across the whole world. This is touching everybody. Of the 4,000 UK businesses that have been surveyed, 45% said that productivity was already substantially below normal. And I expect, I don't know, that was maybe a week, 10 days ago that we got that. I suspect it's got even worse. Over a quarter of firms are intending to lay off staff, and the FTSE 100 has dropped 28.8%. So that signifies that there's a real threat of a global recession as well. The Treasury initially estimated that as many as 3 million people, now 3 million people is 10% of the private sector population of this country, would be furloughed, and it's already exceeded 9 million. So I think we can see that this is having a significant impact on businesses across the length and breadth of the country, and we can see the global impact that this is happening. So in terms of the actual business impact, we're seeing it hitting on both supply and demand. Supply in terms of the reduction in the labour that's available due to the kind of legislative changes and the restrictions, meaning that people have got to work from home, through the illness itself and through childcare and other caring reasons that people normally will have cover for. And then also in the demand, there's already been a dramatic downturn in demand for certain products, and some businesses are unable to operate at all. So it's with this backdrop that the Bank of England have already lowered interest rates to 0.25%, and we've put a £30 billion government scheme in place to support businesses. And already there is a lot of debate about whether that's going to be something that's going to be sustainable, and to what extent that is actually going to help the people that need to be helped right now. We've also seen support measures put in place for sick pay and for business rates for this year, but really we have to say, is this going to be enough? It's likely still to have a devastating knock-on effect on businesses across the whole nation, and indeed broader than that across the world. A likely reduction in workforces, as many people sadly, they're going to lose their jobs. And it's in this shocking and unprecedented background that we've pulled together some guidance and resources and some practical tools for leaders to help you and your teams navigate a safe and a compliant way through the current crisis, and for future-proofing your organisation beyond that. So, how are businesses responding? Well, overnight, the whole landscape of work has been turned upside down. So, government advice has mandated that, with the exception of a few key workers, everybody's got to work from home. And IT departments and HR departments are suddenly having to tackle problems that they've not had to tackle before. Your IT functions looking at solutions where people can continue to work effectively from home, can still function as a business, and the HR teams looking at the policies, procedures, and guidance for managers to help sort of support that. I mean, dealing with a remote workforce when you've been used to close and quite high proximity, high touch type of relationships, things are going to be very different for quite some time. So business leaders are going to have to look at ways of reducing costs and finding innovative ways between what is going to be the new normal for us to provide the business updates, and also have tough conversations and phone calls, which really you don't want to be having across an electronic dialogue. You want to be having these sort of conversations face to face. So it's a way of being able to get around these and doing these in an appropriate way, where we've had organisations that have perhaps been used to operating at a single location, seeing everybody every day, and having a much more sort of a high touch approach to the way that they do business. So we've got some basic principles here. I mean, as a company whose ethos is about putting employee welfare at the heart of what we do, we put clear and open communication as being the cornerstone of any guiding principle. And I think as we go through the presentation with you today, communication is going to be something that we will certainly be putting a lot of emphasis on, and which we think is key. We believe that every interaction, even these tough conversations that we were speaking about before, that might have a negative impact on an individual, they need to be dealt with sensitively, and they need to be dealt with dignity. And it's difficult to do this with people that we're used to working with every day, and the dynamic changing from perhaps where we're all prospering together to a point where we've got to have some tough conversations. Businesses need to formulate a clear communication strategy. We need virtual town halls and regular email updates to keep colleagues informed and provide support and reassurance. This should cascade right down the organisation, with functional meetings, one-to-ones, and objective settings moving to video calls. Although there is a balance to strike here, right? We were speaking to one of our clients earlier in the week who had some feedback from one of their employees saying, it's great that I'm getting all the support, but I don't really want to have my boss in my living room 5 days a week. And, there's definitely a balance that you need to strike here between regular contact and providing support, and maybe being too intrusive, because you've got to appreciate at this time you've got couples who previously were both working and were able to bring childcare support in, who are actually doing everything now from home and teaching. So it's tough times for people. As leaders, I think it's important that we keep on top of the government updates, which we're getting on a daily basis, but we need to sort of filter out the real important parts of those and cascade them through the organisation and make sure that we're highlighting those that and contextualising those for our own businesses. It's also important at this time to make sure that we stay in touch. So you want to be keeping up to date with contact numbers, emergency contact details, and ensuring that everything is clear and above board from that point of view, because we may well need to be contacting people in different ways. And there may be times where we have to contact people's families right now. So some basic principles. So when we have employees working from home, it may seem obvious, but if they're working from home, we need to continue to pay them. So if they're continuing to be productive, or furlough is not an option for your business, then it stands to reason that despite the fact people are maybe not coming in every day, if they're still doing their jobs, they need to be paid. We need to keep in regular contact. I think I mentioned previously that you should give some consideration to using some sort of virtual weekly town hall, just to give everybody the same update and ensure that people are, they're getting a regular touch point across the whole business. And we also need to make sure that one-to-ones, emails, just regular touch points with people are happening. But this should also extend to social events. I mean, other clients that we've spoken to are still making sure that they are marking birthdays, leaving parties in the normal sort of a way. And they've even extended things like virtual quizzes, bringing everyone together. We've heard about lunches where everybody gets the same meal or a choice from menu delivered across the various options that are open to us getting home deliveries, and trying to have a touch point in the week where perhaps we would have gone and got a lunch and had a working lunch, something like this. It's important that we're checking on employees' health and well-being, and also encouraging all our staff to look out for one another and make sure that anybody who's struggling gets the help that they need. I've also put a link there, and it's also in the material at the end of the presentation. We've got the health and safety executive guidelines, where you've got a useful resource where you can get checklists so that you can check that people's remote workstations are all compliant and they're sitting in appropriate chairs and this type of thing. So lots of good resources. I've put all of those in the appendix that we've got at the end of the presentation. So moving on, I want to look at some tools that are either coming to the fore or we're using in different ways as a result of the situation that we find ourselves in. I mean, there's a variety of apps and business tools out there that some of us have been using already anyway, and some of which you've maybe used in your personal life before, but that have really come to prominence. Three that I'm going to focus on today are Zoom. Now, Zoom, we're actually doing this webinar from a Zoom webinar, and it's really been the conferencing service that has come to the fore in all of this. Provides video conferencing, online meetings, chat, mobile collaborations, and if you pay for extra service beyond the 40-minute calls, which are actually free, so if you've got only the requirement for short video calls, you can absolutely use this for free. Beyond that, if you want to use the extra facilities such as webinar and so on, there is a sort of small monthly payment for it, but it does allow everybody to come together, collaborate, and there's lots of nice features in Zoom that it's not quite like being there in person, as it's never going to be. But if you've worked maybe internationally before and you've had to deal with clients in different countries where you've maybe had that initial meeting when you've been able to go and meet in person, and beyond that the relationships maybe moved to more of an online relationship, then this won't be too dissimilar to the way that you'd have worked in that type of business. Then got WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a messaging service where you can send both text and voice messages. It's also got another nice feature where if you're calling somebody direct on WhatsApp, there's actually no charge for that if both people are on broadband. So it's a good alternative to keep the mobile phone costs down and this type of thing. And it's also useful if you don't have a desktop messenger such as Slack or one of the similar sorts of messaging services. It allows you to do much the same thing. It really is useful for getting basic information to somebody, and it also has the additional feature of voice calling and video calling that I covered a minute ago. And it's not just keeping in touch with colleagues that needs to be via business tools. We can use some of the other apps that are out there as well. So House Party, for example, was something that I actually was highlighted to me by my children. They'd been using it and suggested that I sign up as a good way of kind of staying in contact with them remotely. And it's much more of a social networking tool. It feels much more lighthearted and sociable, but it's a nice platform for the team lunches that we discussed, or maybe after work drinks or quizzes and this type of thing. So I'm going to move on now and speak about some common questions and approaches. And I did just want to say before we started on this that obviously some of the examples that I've pulled together have resulted of common questions that have come up from some of our own clients. It's not extensive, and also the suggested ways of dealing with things here may differ depending on the situation, but we're keen to push this out there as just some common examples that we've got. And if any of you want to follow up with us after the webinar, we're very happy to have a conversation with you on your specific requirements. We feel very much that, you know, we're all in this together, and we'd like to give something back right now as well. So if you have any questions that are maybe going off-piste from exactly what we're talking about here, we're very happy to pick up with you for no charge to look at what your requirements are. So what if a colleague has coronavirus? Well, again, it's about communication being the key, and everybody making sure that they're aware of what the protocol is within the organisation. You need to establish a protocol, be very clear about it, cascade it through your managers, and make sure that everybody's clear on what their requirements are. So all employees ought to have a duty of care to say to their employer if they're experiencing symptoms, or if it's detected, then somebody should be sent home straight away. All contact should be avoided, and the individual should be self-isolated until such time as arrangements can be made to either get them home or into the appropriate medical care. You need to make sure that you've got hand sanitizer and tissues around the place to make sure that any coughing can be dealt with by using tissues, and those tissues then discarded. And you should consider a deep clean of the office space if the affected areas of the workplace are common ones that other people are also using. The individual should also self-isolate for 7 days, and indeed if their family then shows symptoms, they may need to self-isolate for longer until those symptoms have cleared, or until 14 days after they first displayed the symptoms. So what if an employee doesn't want to return to work? They've been off and they don't want to return. I mean, all these things are kind of relevant now, but they're going to be relevant down the line as well. So if it's not a case of somebody coming back to work right now, when the period of isolation finishes, it may be something that comes to light again. And there could be a variety of reasons why somebody doesn't want to work at the moment. It could be childcare reasons. They could have commitments as a carer. So it's important that we get under the skin of what the problem is, and managers should really listen to what an individual's circumstances are. They should look at whether there are any short-term workarounds or alternative work that could be considered, and also look at offering unpaid leave or taking accrued holiday. Although there's not an obligation for you to do this, it's sometimes a way of just being able to move us through that initial period and making sure that we get to a good resolution. And particular consideration should be given to anyone who could be considered vulnerable in the workplace. So anyone who's pre-existing condition could be considered to be a disability or something like this, then we need to look out in particular for those people. But I would stress though, if somebody doesn't make reasonable contact or they don't attend work without informing you, and then as in normal circumstances, it could be a disciplinary offence. And in such circumstances, you should either look at your company policy, speak to your HR team, or come and speak to ourselves, and we can give you some initial advice on how you deal with these sort of cases. So what's the position with self-isolation and sick pay is another common question that's been coming up. So the current government guidance is that if an individual has the coronavirus, they should self-isolate for 7 days. If a member of the family has coronavirus, guidance is that anyone coming into contact with them should self-isolate for 14 days. If the employee is fit to work, they should come to work, and if they're unable to work but able to work from home, that's perfectly acceptable. If they can be doing useful work and you are quite comfortable with that they're producing at home, if they feel well enough to do it, it's quite acceptable for them to work while they're at home. Sick pay should be paid in line with the company policy, and as a minimum you need to be paying SSP, which is statutory sick pay, and any certification that's associated with that should be also in line with the company policy. So, next question, what if I need to close the business? Well, employees need to be kept up to date with any developments where it's either down to government advice, economic conditions, or a duty of care in the workplace that you need to close the business. You need to make employees know and confirm those key messages to them in writing. It's important that they're aware that there's support for them. So we've provided in the appendix of the meeting some details of the government resources that are there to support, also the coronavirus retention scheme. And you need to show as an employer that you've considered these alternatives before you move to a redundancy program or something like that. If you need to discuss any of the sort of intricacies in this in more detail, again, I would encourage you to give us a call. We can start to have a dialogue about that. Next, what is furlough? So furlough basically means that an employee's job is put on pause or put on standby. It's a very antiquated term that I think many of us in HR hadn't come across, certainly for a long time, or perhaps hadn't come across at all. But more commonly, the coronavirus retention scheme allows firms to put employees who were on the payroll as of the 28th of February on furlough, meaning that they don't work, but they get paid by the employer with money that's provided by the state. It's currently anticipated that the online portal for reimbursement of this will be operational by the end of April. So we'll be pushing out the details of that when it does go live. We've got, at the moment, a link to the holding page for that in the appendix of this presentation. So you can have a look at it there. But basically what we're looking at is that 80% of an employee's salary will be covered by the scheme up to a cap of £2,500, and you can sort of top that up to 100% if you feel that's appropriate as an employer. I mean, furlough is better for employees than redundancy or unpaid leave, and it's the government's aim to protect the financial victims of coronavirus and enable employees to pick up where they were on the other side of this and put them back in the same sort of position that they were in before all of this started. So how do you furlough staff? Well, many businesses are already initiating the process. So like any other sensitive conversation, it needs to be done in an open, fair and supportive way. The individual needs to be told the rationale behind the decision, outlining the specific impact that there's been on the business. And the individual should be presented with what we're calling furlough terms. It's essentially a document varying their contractual terms that they would have to sign and return to you, and they should be given the opportunity to ask any questions and seek any clarification that they need in a meeting. We've got template letters and sort of suggested ways of dealing with this that again you can find in the in the appendix at the end of the presentation. And should an employee disagree with the decision to furlough them, you should try and reach an agreement. However, if that's not possible, you can also look at either redundancy or other means of arriving at the same situation. Again, if there are individual cases, we find it's often better to speak about them directly rather than speculate on what the various outcomes would be. So again, something we would be very happy to take a call on. There's no reason why employees can choose to supplement the salaries. Employers could choose to supplement employees' salaries initially and then decide not to do this in later months. So while the government support is there, it may be that you're prepared to top it up initially. But after the 3-month period, you may want to step away from that. That is something that is quite appropriate, the ways and means of doing it, and we can have a conversation about the appropriate way of doing that, but it's fairly straightforward, and you shouldn't feel that just because you have decided that you'll support the 100% salary in the initial terms that you'd continue to do that, because economically it may reach a point where it's not possible. Furloughed employees' wages are subject to income tax and national insurance in the usual way. And we've already seen that it's quite an emotive subject. We've seen FTSE 250, FTSE 100 companies that have decided to furlough employees, and they've had a lot of negative press in doing so. And we've also seen a number of UK football teams who have elected to furlough staff and had a lot of bad publicity, both from their own fans and from the media and fans of other clubs. So I think it's fairly well recognised that it's quite an emotive subject. So the option to update the government's 80% is something, as we've said before, that you could consider doing, and indeed it may be something that will generate a lot of goodwill with your employees at the present time. Moving on, I'd like to speak a little bit about some other ways and means of being able to reduce or contain costs at this time. So we're touching now on layoffs and short-term working. So a layoff is where there's no work for an employee to complete. So the employer asks the employee to take some leave without pay, although the employee will remain as an employee and won't be dismissed as a result of that exercise. Short-term working is where there's a reduction in work overall, so the employer has less work and is therefore only able to offer the employee less work, but obviously that consequently means that they would only be paid for the amount of work that we complete. But these clauses are can only be exercised if they're already in a contract of employment, it's already custom and practice, if it's something that you can agree with the trade union, or there's an agreed change in the employee contract that means that you can do that. It's something that we've tended to find used quite often, and there is a provision anyway in a lot of manufacturing businesses, for example, because when there is no product there to be able to work on, then they obviously need the flexibility to be able to withdraw or reduce the amount of work. So what other measures can you consider short of furlough or reducing hours and this type of thing? We can look at working from home. We can look at suitable alternative employment. You could reduce hours. Unpaid leave may be appropriate. Utilising holiday. Considering the overall organisation shape and size, it might be a time to look at the roots and branches of the organisation and decide, are we coming back in the same shape and size as we were before? Do we need to look at maybe making some roles more generic? And there may be a resultant organisational change. And this type of organisational design and optioneering, if you like, is something that quite often we can provide support to some of our clients with. But another means of being able to kind of elicit some of the right answers is speaking to the employees themselves and asking them, guys, have you got any ideas yourselves that you can bring to bring to the party, because often they know the business as well as anybody else, and obviously our employees are a useful source of input as well. So in terms of other good practice and other guidance, what else can we consider? So I think that some of the things that we can look at, again, we're re-emphasising again communication. I think we cannot emphasise that often enough. It's ensuring that back and forth communication, open communication is there with your employees. You also need to make sure that social distancing continues to be observed, whether it's, you know, right now, if you're in a sort of protected occupation where your people are still working right now, or whether this is something that we're talking about when people come back to work, we need to make sure that social distancing continues to be observed. We need to pay particular attention to individuals who identify themselves as being vulnerable. Travel will still need to be curtailed. We need to continue to encourage staff to work from home, and we need to develop policy and guidance to be able to support this. And this is an area that we can obviously provide you with some templates and advice on if it's something that you'd like to explore further. We need to make sure that both managers and staff are clear of what the regulations are and the latest government position and how this translates to the workplace. I think it's very unlikely that when things get relaxed that we're actually just going to flip back to a position where everybody comes to work every day. It's much more likely that that's going to be a staggered return, and that if you can ring fence people that can stay at home for longer, I would certainly anticipate that that's something that's going to be considered. I'm only saying this because I've started to look at the situation in Wuhan, and that was obviously where the coronavirus first started to really mushroom, and looking at the ways that they're starting to look at returning people to work. These are some of the measures that they're continuing. So I would anticipate that we'll look at countries that are a little bit further ahead in the curve than us, and we will kind of adopt some of the successful measures that they look at. So probably a little bit of speculation at this point, but we continue to watch what's happening in other countries and educate ourselves on that basis too. So we also need to make make an extra special effort around toilets, kitchen, communal areas need to be kept clean, with clear instructions for staff on how they wash their hands. Hand sanitizers should be provided in toilets and communal areas, and particular attention should be given to cleaning handrails and door handles and this type of thing, because we're in unusual times and need to take some exceptional measures. Now, the next slide, I've put together some useful resources for you. So we've got a number of things that in there that we think might be useful from the ACAS guidelines. We've also got some details there from the government website. We've got some basic health advice from the NHS. We've got some CIPD guidance, which is the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development. There's all of these have got sort of moving updates on COVID-19. They're supplying letter templates and policies and things that we need to be considering. So all useful resources to be looking at the moment. We will continue to update our website with other useful links and resources, and please feel free to go and look at those and take whatever's there that we can provide. As I said before, we're very much of the view that we're in this together, and anything that we can provide out there that we're not actually doing active work towards and would just be useful resources for people, we've decided that the right thing to do at the moment is to make those available to anybody that wants to access them, and basic resources at the moment free for any of you to access. We're now also looking at booking in 30 minutes of free consultation calls to answer any individual queries. So if there's something that struck a chord with you today, you'd like to look at it in a little more detail, then please feel free to give us a call. We'll be very, very happy to give you some some further advice on that, go into the actual specific issues that you have. And if you want to follow up beyond that, again, we're very open to speaking with you. I've put together some contact details for myself and Nicola. Also on the website, we've got details, and we really would like to hear from you. If we can help you at this time, we'd be delighted. So I think that's the end of today's information sharing and webinar. We intend to have another one shortly. I'd like to have a follow-up webinar, which is going to be looking at how we kick out of this, how we start to consider bringing the workforce back into the workplace. I think these are big questions that none of us really have a solution to at the moment. I can see that you know, we at some point in the future we will be able to bring people back, but after they've been away for a while, will people want to come back? Will people be able to come back? Some of the points that we touched on today around you know, the curve's going to be different for everybody, and where people may have been untouched by this so far, but may in the near future, when we start to come back from this, it may then become an issue. So we're going to continue to update the website. We'd like to continue this discussion, move it forward to how businesses are going to come out the other side of this, and that's going to be the subject matter of the next webinar, which we very much welcome you all coming back and speaking with us again at that time. I'm going to stop today's initial broadcast, but it was great to see so many people here. Great to see some familiar names. Thank you all for coming on, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks a lot.